Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion with Hispanic founders in the MedTech ecosystem. This program is presented by MedTech Colors Education Planning Committee. This is a special panel not only because it represents Hispanic founders in MedTech, but because one of our panelists made history just 1 week ago by becoming the first respiratory physician-led and Lat-Am-based company to win MedTech Innovators. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Maria Artunduaga. I'm about to kick off our presentation, but before I do, I'd like to do an audience poll to see who's joining us today. Please take a moment to complete the poll. All right, thank you so much for completing the poll. It looks like we have several of you who are here as investors, founders, as well as some service providers. So thank you all again for joining us. I'd also like to, thank you so much. I'd also like to start off by setting the stage of the importance and the timeliness of today's discussion. A 2023 Stanford report revealed that although more than 10% of all Latina-based businesses were in the technology field, they received less than 1% of all venture capital funding in 2021. A more recent report, the McKinsey report, found that though the trend is trending up higher, slightly higher, where in 2022, 1.5% of all venture capital went to Latino-funded organizations. And despite being one of the fastest growing demographics in the US, Hispanics and Latinos encounter barriers to healthcare access and experience poor health outcomes. Factors such as language barriers, lack of insurance, and economic disparities contribute to these inequities. This is why it's important to support Hispanic and Latino founders and the solutions they're addressing to these challenges. And again, the relevance of the importance of today's discussion with our panelists. MedTech's color mission is to advance the representation of people of color in the MedTech ecosystem so that we can change these numbers. We advance the mission by focusing on 3 goals. 1, providing professional home that nurtures thought leadership and harnesses a sense of community. 2, fostering leadership excellence so that MedTech leaders of color can excel and be recognized. And finally, being a convener that drives solutions to apply an equity lens to the product development process and diversifies clinical trials. Our core programs are the pitch program, the collaborative community, and our networking breakfast. I like to spend a little bit of time highlighting our pitch competition as it's relevant to today's conversation, as all 3 of our panelists joining us today have participated in the pitch competition. Our pitch competition serves both seed and series-ready companies, including pediatric devices, and has provided over $1.1 million in non-dilutive funding and in-kind resources to underrepresented founders since 2021. The program has attracted over 400 applicants, and 60% of finalists enter the pitch competition with less than $1 million in funding. The total amount of dollars raised for startups that were funded is over $25 million from over 40 investors. In addition, 2 of these companies have since been acquired. MedTech Color membership is an opportunity for leaders of color in MedTech to connect, engage, and thrive in our industry's continuous need for diverse individuals to be involved in the design of medical innovations. We focus on coming together to explore ways of advancing representation and amplifying the experiences of people of color in our industry. Please consider joining MedTech today as a professional or associate member. We also have a team of MedTech's color staff behind the scenes that are running the technical portion of our program today. They'll be monitoring the questions and troubleshooting. There are a few reminders that they'll put in the chat to help ensure the smooth run of today's program. We've also provided a troubleshooting and information guide located in the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. And feel free to refer to this throughout today's session if necessary. We will also be doing we'll be having Q&A towards the end of our presentation today. So if you do have any questions for any of our panelists, please feel free to put it in the Q&A chat. And if any of your questions are directed to any of our panelists specifically, please indicate that with your question. Today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the MedTech Colors YouTube channel a few days following the conclusion of today's session. And towards the end of today's session, we will also be doing a pop-up survey to get your feedback on how we can bring additional learning opportunities to support the needs of the community. I will now ask our panelists to come off camera and we'll go ahead and introduce them. So we'll go ahead and start with our first panelist, Dr. Maria Artunduaga.
Oh, thank you so much for the intro, Jasmine. Hi, everybody. I'm Maria Artunduaga, the founder and CEO of Samay. It's a company that is building AI and wearables for respiratory diseases, starting with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. And I started a company over 5 years ago, inspired by personal tragedy when I lost my abuela to a COPD exacerbation, a respiratory attack. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Next, we have with us Dr. Sandra Saldaña.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Sandra Saldaña. I'm the CEO and co-founder of alumni Health. We are developing a non-invasive wearable device for stroke detection, and it uses AI and machine learning algorithms to detect the onset of stroke and connects patients with 911 and emergency responders. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us. And finally, we have with us Dr. Gabriel Sanchez.
Hi, pleasure to be here. Thanks so much. Gabriel Sanchez, CEO, co-founder at Enspectra Health. And if you've heard of point-of-care ultrasound, we're developing point-of-care pathology. And so we've been developing a non-invasive microscope to image through skin and ideally identify skin cancers, but also lots of topical applications for conditions that affect skin. I invented the technology in my PhD at Stanford, and then I was also an instructor, and then I left academia to do this full time. So just an awesome opportunity to be here with everyone.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for joining us today. So we're going to go ahead and kick off our discussion with really jumping into what inspired you to start your MedTech companies. So we'll go ahead and start with you, Sandra, if you want to share what inspired you.
Sure. So my training is in the scientific side of things. So I did a PhD in cancer biology because I've always been interested in that basic sciences aspect. I also had a lot of experience with nanobiotechnology research and applied scientific research, which really kind of gave me that passion for applied technologies. With my family's background on the business side of things, I've always kind of knew that I wanted to start a business at some point in my career. So, after my PhD, I had the opportunity to merge those two, go into consulting for a few years, and then eventually started my company. I felt that MedTech really gave that opportunity to create a product that would be able to impact patients fairly quickly, at least compared to the biotechnology and therapeutic side of things, which can take 15, 20 years to develop a product. I thought MedTech was really attractive because it gave that platform to move more quickly and impact patients' lives.
Thank you. And Maria, in your intro, you shared a little bit about your motivation, but if you can share a little bit more about what inspired you to start your company.
Yeah, it's a long story. I'm gonna try to make it short. So as you have noticed, I have an accent. I'm from Colombia. I am from a family physician, and I had originally planned to come to the US to become a pediatric plastic surgeon and eventually go back to Colombia and set up a very official center for surgery and like, research. I really like science. So I spent 4 years of genetics research at Harvard, did very, very well, even got a green card under 4 years as a, I don't know, alien of extraordinary abilities kind of thing. Got into plastic surgery. I was the very first woman from a Latin American school to get into plastics in the history of the US. I worked really hard. I'm not a genius or anything. I just work hard. And I experienced discrimination firsthand. That was back in 2011. It was the most difficult situation I had ever experienced in my life. And at the time, my grandmother passed from COPD. It was an interesting time in my life. I just decided to leave clinical medicine for good. I was trying to find a new niche. I didn't want to go back to clinical medicine, to practicing is what was too traumatized. And the other thing is that I realized that a woman like me that is very driven, ambitious, and has a strong leadership skills, it would be very, very hard for me to succeed in the academic world, especially like at this time of history. It would probably take 2 or 3 more generations to be able to do that. So I just said to my parents, I'm just going to leave and do something else. Initially go off public health. I did a master's degree in public health at the University of Washington in Seattle. Eventually realized that it takes forever to get people aligned or anything with public health and nonprofits. So again, type A personality, much of a discernment that I want to be. Ended up here in the Bay Area. My husband got a job at Google, and inspired by his work at Google, where he does mainly like magic, that's how I call it, with consumer products, especially with phones, audio and speakers and sensors like that. I got inspired by his day-to-day job to create the technology behind Samay. And so yeah, I mean, sort of like I don't want to say it, but it seemed like I was destined to do this somehow. I was married to the guy who, was, inspiring for my technology. My grandmother died, and I was a doctor doing a business class. I asked a lot of questions around pulmonology, and I even like I had a eureka moment when I was interviewing a doctor, and that was how everything started. It was very interesting to tell you the truth, and it's working, which is the most exciting thing so far.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing. And Gabriel, I know your background is in mechanical engineering. So what got you to this point to start your company?
Yeah, sure. So I do have a pretty deep technical background, but I'm working on it to kind of fix that. And
what do you mean?
Yeah, my journey is also circuitous. So I grew up on a cattle ranch and farm in very rural New Mexico, just to give you a sense of scale. Lived 65 miles from where I went to school. And so I was fortunate to have a very supportive family, and it's a beautiful environment, but I would say a little bit provincial in terms of mindset. Like, you would not know anybody who would ever have started a company, and it would almost be considered rude to propose that you could do such a thing. So I got pulled into it basically by being a good student and through school. So I went to MIT for undergrad, had a knack for engineering, and I started in sort of traditional robotics and mechatronics, and got involved early in undergrad research in a bioinstrumentation lab, which we would call like wearables now, right? And so I got pulled into med device through that. I felt like I should keep learning, so I went to grad school at Stanford and got interested in the PhD. That's where I started to learn about kind of doing, hypothesis-driven research, and ended up working on a project to try to study muscle. And the biggest problem was we couldn't really image the tissue. And so I, being sort of a device guy, I was like, well, what we need to do is make a better microscope. And so I turned that into a PhD project. I got hired right out of my PhD to teach at Stanford. And then my dream at that point was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go academic and be a professor. And but realizing that we had this technology that I thought could really make a difference in a different way. So maybe not just being the source of papers in a lab, but maybe have a practical use outside. And through my connections with Stanford and the biodesign group, started to get the bug that maybe we should try to do this for real, and went ahead and took the plunge and launched out of the company, out of the university. So I licensed a few patents out that I had there from Stanford, started the rat race, raising the money and trying to make this happen so that we could really, impact in a different way. So that was, and that's how I got there. But I'd say for me, it's been, I'm only looking maybe one step ahead at any given time, and just sort of, it feels like it happened to me or I was compelled to do it. So that's my connection. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. So Sandra, Maria kind of touched on this a little bit, like through her journey of getting started, some of the challenges that you may face as a founder of color. Can you share maybe any of the challenges that you've faced and how you've overcome those?
Yeah, I would say a big one for me has been, since the very early days has been the fundraising aspect, which I think is a big issue for a lot of entrepreneurs. But I think for Latino entrepreneurs in particular, who receive much less funding compared to the general population. In the early days, I mean, I think when we spun out of Yale University, we spun out of this very elite university where, networks are very big, and there's this expectation that you're going to raise this angel or like friends and family around. You're just going to gather all your friends around and they're all going to pitch in $25,000 a pop and you're going to get this thing off the ground. And so a lot of that was a challenge for me because coming from Mexico, I moved to this country when I was 12 years old. My family moved over after the devaluation of the peso in 1995. We, just in search of better career opportunities and education. I didn't know English at the time, so I learned English and, kind of had to navigate middle school, high school, college, grad school, my whole career pretty much starting without an existing network in this country. And so, when the expectation was that I was going to call up my grandmother and have her wire, $40,000 into my bank account to start this business, when my grandmother loves me, but she's, a retired teacher in Mexico, living on a pension. So it's challenging to kind of be compared to the standard that, that it's expected in the med tech or in any startup. And so that was oftentimes like a red flag that people marked as like something that was wrong with me and my inability to bring in capital in the early days. And so it made it even more challenging to attract more investors. And so that's been a really big one for me. It's just like, kind of catching up to the network building that you need to be able to launch a successful company in this country has been tough.
Thank you for sharing that. And so maybe a question for all of you, if we can build on that a little bit. How do we change that narrative or that mindset for investors to realize like not everyone is that typical story that has family members that are able to invest? Like, what are some things that we can do to try to change that narrative?
Yeah.
There you go.
Right. Yeah,
I know you have you have your opinions on this, right?
Gee whiz. I would appreciate, Sandra sharing that. That is like the story of my life and my experience. It's this mix of cracking these networks is incredibly difficult. And there's a negative perception in terms of CEO fundability. So you sometimes have interest from investors and they're like, wow, but I just don't know if you're going to raise the next round, right? And because it's so hard, right? And I've heard that multiple times, and that's just like really frustrating. The only thing, I don't have a formula, but the only thing that has tended to work for me has been to run at the challenges that are basically everybody's running away from, and go for harder stuff. So in one way, it culls the herd and sort of thins out who's actually crazy enough to go for it. And then two, if you can pull it off, then you'll get some visibility. And I found that I had to do that all the way up, all through school and all through research and academia, because you tend to not get, it hasn't happened to me where someone's been like, I think you could do it. Let me give you some resources. Let's see if you can make it happen. We have to perform first. And so the good news is we're kind of used to that. We're used to, working smarter and harder and doing more with less and being scrappy. And so I think you've got a lot of that built-in resilience, coming from these backgrounds, and figure we're already kind of up against the current. So just go harder, and you got to be risk driven, and it's tough. And I think it's really hard. And it's, that's something I think you can kind of do as an individual. That's sort of separate from the macro social challenge, though. And I think, unfortunately, that's probably going to take some time. to work out. But I don't know if Maria has any other points on that.
I mean, we have talked, offline about this. It's I don't think it's gonna change anytime soon, probably in the next 10 years or so, or maybe in 20. If we don't have historical precedents, it's going to be very, very hard for investors to just give you the money because there is no precedent, right? Like how many Latinas or Latinos are taking American technology IPO or sell it for millions, right? Over 500 million, the ideal exit. It's going to be very, very hard. Just like Gabriel, right? We need to work harder. That's a reality. And more importantly, validation. That's a new term that I learned here in the US. I had no idea that you needed to validate yourself until I came to this country. So that's why I try to judge myself to the highest bar that I can, because I know that people expect the best or probably more from me. So just to give you an example, MedTech Innovator, right? We just won the competition. We were the underdog. There were 64 other companies, but the way how they chose the finalists was, I knew this because Sandra told me, the other people that had won the competition, is that, I always try to crack the code, right? I study very hard. Again, I'm not the wisest, I'm not the smartest, but I'm very good at analyzing data. That's my superpower. So for example, I'm going to deviate a little bit. I knew that if I wanted to stay in the US, like being card holder, I need to do X, Y, and Z. I studied people that had already done it, and in less than 3 years, I was able to do it. I worked really hard. So publications, about myself, about my work, I don't know, a bunch of things, fellowships, scholarships. I'm all about free money, you go for it. And the same thing happened with MedTech Innovator. I knew that the best companies were going to be chosen, obviously, as the company itself, the technology, the traction, the market, yada, 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 the usual, the typical. But the only way to differentiate yourself from everybody else is engagement, right? How participative you were, how many webinars you went to, how many questions, all about helping the community, being there, being present, being the best student you can be. That was us. I even took people from my team to participate in the webinars. I overdid it. And it worked out. At the end, we were chosen out of a top 10. And I was very, I asked to my mentors, I need to get into the finals, right? This is a team's effort. Let's meet every week for 30 minutes. And this is the agenda, this is everything. And I'm going to show you that I'm top 5 material. And tell me your expectations, and I just delivered. So that's how we got into the finals. And eventually, we won because, again, I overstudied everybody, including Sandra's speech, for example. The questions and everything, I asked help to probably 10 to 15 people to prepare my deck, my speech, everything. So that's why we won. It was an effort, literally.
Definitely. And I think you guys are just echoing how the importance of not only hard work, but why that representation matters. Maria, you were saying how you were able to leverage some of the work that Sandra had done beforehand. So definitely that hard work and that representation matters. Sandra, if I can ask you, we talked about maybe some of the challenges that a person of color that you're having in this industry, but how has your background maybe influenced what you're doing in a positive way?
So I think, I think it's the challenges that we've faced. I think ultimately, I have built a lot of resilience around, taking a lot of no's and just kind of rolling with the punches. I think it's part of building a business. And so I think, the challenges ultimately help you to, refine. You have to always find what does resonate. You're getting a ton of no's, but within those no's, you're always looking for that glimmer of hope and refining the story, refining the business plan, refining yourself to fit what is going to be selected as the winning technology in this industry. So I think just with any challenges, I think that helps. The other way that I think my background as just as an immigrant coming to this country, I think when we first came over, parents, and like my dad did speak English, my mom did not. So like we came over, my dad took on like 3 jobs, and like we didn't have health insurance for like the first couple of years when we lived here. And so kind of have that experience of like my younger brother like used to get sick a ton. So, just like having to go to these like clinics where like they take patients that don't have health insurance, and like seeing like how there are so many people in this country that like don't have access to like the traditional healthcare, has kind of, given me that, that lens. So when we're developing our product, I'm always thinking that in the back of my mind. It's like, how are people going to access this who can't afford it? And like, how are we going to, help people to attain this health outcomes if they don't have, the top-notch health insurance? And so you have to build that into like pricing, and how, if this product's going to be out of pocket in the beginning, like how do you make it accessible to other people, and so that you can give others a chance to also be healthy. So I think, just like having that different like perspective, it gives you some of these insights that maybe other people don't have experience with.
Definitely. So you were talking about like just some of these different challenges and the resilience that you've been able to build. So Gabriel, can you share maybe a little bit about if there's been a key moment that's defined your entrepreneurial journey, and then what skill set do you think you like learned or honed during those key moments?
So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of gems in this already. The best professional example I had that actually prepared me for this was trying to get my PhD, which is also about funding, believe it or not. Which I didn't quite understand. I didn't understand how you kind of matriculate through these programs. And so I came in as a master's student and was doing research in a lab, and came time to do the qualifying exams and try to go forward. And there was actually not any support or funding for me. And so basically, if you can't either directly pay yourself, or if you can't get some sort of a scholarship or fellowship, you're sort of out of luck. And so, but I was sort of dead set on it. So I basically started digging around. And one thing I would echo on with what Maria says, if you just do some basic research and preparation, you're ahead of 90% of the crowd. So I started digging and I started poking around, and you need to be good with working with people and building advocates. And so I had a fairly strong advocate, Dr. Noe Lozano, who is the kind of the head of the diversity program there at Stanford for graduate students. I said, I'm dead set on doing this. We got to find some money. And so we started poking around. And what we found out was that there's a fellowship that's offered to outside students to bring them in. And turned out two students actually turned down the fellowship that year. And so there was some money left over. And so they were thinking about what we're going to do with the surplus. And they came to the decision that they were going to turn these it's like 2 3-year fellowships into maybe 4 2-year fellowships to support from within. And so they said, and they're gathering names, right? And of course, nobody knows about this unless you dig, right? This is all quite like my advisor that I was doing research for is on the decision panel and didn't even tell me about this sort of thing, right? So like, you got to dig and find this out. And so I found out, I wrote my own recommendation. I put my name in the pot, and then like Maria said, figure out who's actually voting on this, and then went and talked to all the different folks that are on the panel, and basically wiggled my name up to the top, and I got one of the fellowships. And then that was enough breathing room that got me 2 years. And then with that, I was able to do enough research and then qualify for another NIH fellowship to support the rest of my PhD. So I've been basically fundraising sort of like scrappy all the way. And then when I went out and started a company, it was no different. It was all just about bootstrapping. So yeah, it was interesting. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Maria?
Yeah, it's very similar to you, Uriel. So then I think as an immigrant, right? I mean, everybody knows it's the 3 key components are grit, hard work, and especially creativity. So similarly to Gabriel, I've oh my gosh, how many awards? I think I have like 60 on like tiny little things, right? Like a fellowship here, a scholarship there. I did my master's at Berkeley with a mini scholarship from the Gilead Foundation. I don't even remember, right? Like I am capable of finding money, especially non-dilutive, anywhere. So yeah, I mean, people generally are very lazy to do the work. So you just work a little harder, and that's it. So I've experienced so many things throughout my 44 years of life. I think at two moments. The first was when I got my first grant from the National Science Foundation. That's how I met Sandra, by the way, in Virginia, DC. I don't know.
Yes,
Right.
Arlington.
So I had this idea. I had done or like completed the I-Corps program that they do for customer discovery when they give you some money to like travel around and interview 100 people. But I had no clinical data, really. I mean, the technology was just an idea. But I don't know, I always tell this story behind the company because that's the reason why I'm building what I'm building, right? I'm not like, doing the regular doctor job. And somebody from the National Science Foundation, a program officer, um, he saw like an interview or something on VentureWell. He saw that report and he like forwarded to the guy, to the other program officer who was reviewing my grant. And literally it was all about the story behind it. Obviously the letters of support because they were very, very strong, and my commercialization plan. It made sense, right? Using acoustics to make the lung resonate. I mean, Gabriel, you're the engineer here. But at the time, right, like my chances of getting an actual grant from a federal grant were slim, and they gave me, they sort of like selected me too. They chose me because of that. And I guess no, I definitely the fact that I won MedTech Innovator last week, it has changed a lot of things. It's interesting. The company's the same, right? But yeah, it's validation, right? Like this is a vetting process, Maria. All of the mentors were telling me the same thing. So this is how we get to choose the best. And now that you're like, I don't know, bendecida, right? Sorry, I'm saying it in Spanish. I don't know how to say it in English. I don't know, whatever. So yeah, I mean, like now you are fundable. Yeah, and it's changing things. Just under 7 days, I'm seeing it.
Yeah, congratulations and thank you for sharing that. So you guys kind of already have spoken a bit about like how acquiring funding and going after funding and investment is a little bit different as a minority. Um, what lessons learned or what would you share with your younger self or those who are just starting out? What kind of advice would you provide? Sandra, if we started with you.
I mean, I guess I would start by focusing on the strengths. Like, I guess just like being very, very clear on what my strengths are. Like, what strengths do we bring to the table? Because in the very early days, I mean, we tried to, fundraise in the traditional way that you're taught in school or, by accelerators, just go out and pitch angel investors and, just go through all the traditional ways that most companies on average get funding. But you really have to like understand like what you bring to the table, like what's different about you. And like for me, it was like, well, I don't have the same networks that everyone else is starting off with. So I should have probably focused on the fact that our team was extremely strong on the academic side. So like I have a PhD and I'm the founder, CEO, and then I've got two co-founders that are both faculty at the medical school, and they're very, have amazing track records with raising non-dilutive capital grant funding from NIH, like, NSF, DARPA, like all these government agencies. And like, we have that strength of like, coming up with hypotheses, testing hypotheses and, like really refining from an academic standpoint. And so like that was our true strength in the early days. And I wish that we had focused on that more deeply. I mean, we did start applying for grants pretty early on, but I just didn't realize like how important it was going to be for our survival, because that's how we got our very first funding, was through our first NSF grant when I met Maria. And then shortly after that, we got our first NIH grant as well. And we were, I mean, I'm going to be honest, like we were on the verge of like maybe not being at that point. And like those programs is what brought us into real existence after 2 years of kind of spinning our wheels. And so I think that it's important to like understand what your strengths are and like really lean on those and not pay attention to those like that generic advice that you get you know, when people assume you're just like everybody else, because you're not.
Thank you for sharing that. So Gabriel, I'm gonna like take you back to your professor days. Again, talking about what advice you would give if you were like to design your course on how you would advise somebody starting out to go about obtaining funding. You know, what would you include in that course?
No, well, yeah, Sandra said that perfectly. I couldn't say that any better than myself. I think you should get creative and not fall into the classic mold of what people tell you have to do. Now, I think I will say that to toot my own horn, I think I did do this when I was younger. So we were doing grants before it was cool. It's become a thing now, I will say. But when I started, we leaned in really heavy to that. And that was actually looked at as a negative mark because it was sort of like, well, maybe you can't get venture capital. But it has transitioned now that it is so hard to get VC now that people ask me for advice on how to write grants and to get some money. So it was hard, and it was still the same. It was the same approach where like I understood the science and I knew the academic field, and the people on these panels are primarily academics, right? So knowing the field, I set a target that I knew most people thought was basically impossible. Now it took us 4 grants we got rejected the first 4 times because the first 4 times were like, it can't be done. We basically had to build one first and then show them that it had been done, and then we could get the grants. But then since then, we've raised a little over 8 million non-dilutive from the National Cancer Institute, to the point now that everyone thinks like it's brilliant, right? So I think that's great. So I think just like you got to do your own thing and kind of chart your own course. And sometimes you might not be able to take that traditional pathway that everyone's telling you to do out of the GSP. To the point that I get asked a lot, for example, and I always try to share this with my fellows, to like how to write these grants and how to get this money. But to the point actually now that the NCI requested that we provide our application as a redacted sample. So if you go to the NCI and SBIR and you look for the example of the med device, it's the Enspectra phase 2 application. You can look at that and use that, and always feel free to reach out to me if you want any advice on that. But I would actually teach a little bit about how to write grants. So I think it's important.
I want to be like you, Gabriel.
Yeah.
I want 8 million.
Yeah, no, it's hard though. Like, it's not. Yeah, well, we don't even need to get into that. But I mean, there's a good reason to get venture money. Those grants are they're non-dilutive, but they're not free, and you're doing work for them, and they take a long time. And so I think we do it because we have to, because we're getting creative. But I do think we would probably like to have a priced 20 million round, like our colleagues. So for sure, yeah.
Yeah, 10% success rate for grants. I know that. I'm writing a couple. We are writing a couple. For me, what the question is, what would I tell myself, right?
What advice would you give or tell your younger self?
My goodness. Okay. 2 things. And I tell this to everybody. I do not like to romanticize entrepreneurship at all. I actually recommend against it. Okay, and let me tell you why. So I'm a doctor. I really like science. I was trained to be very pragmatic. If you really want to do this, you need to be obsessed with the problem. The only way to really pull it through is to be obsessed and knowing that there are way too many difficult things to go through before you are probably successful, right? And that everything is going to take longer, meaning double the times for everything. So for me, when I said I was 38, imagine that. I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I'm still obsessed. I would probably do it again, definitely, because of my grandmother. And more importantly, it has a really strong global public health indication, like the indication for use to go, overseas. I'm from Colombia. I have practiced medicine in my country. I have seen the need firsthand. I have managed patients with COPD. I saw it firsthand with my grandmother since I was a little child, right? So to me, it's more of a passion-driven, not project, but at least, I don't know, the startup business. So yeah, that and having sort of an idea of how you're going to support yourself, at least for me. So Ricardo helps me with the company still, but he has a full-time job. So we've been able to use sort of contractors and consultings via grants to support the hardware development. And we were very creative also on hiring people in Colombia, where we actually have right now 9 people doing most of the software development, the platform, the data science, and even now our clinical research. So I was telling a couple of people, and yeah, that week, 50 patients, 6 months followed up are $65, $65,000. I'm sorry, no bucks. I wish. But it's significantly lower than anything here. It's probably 1/5 of the price. So we are very creative about getting things done in a very lean way. I really liked it. I really enjoyed cracking. I'm a hacker. I'm not an engineer, but I really like hacking things. Like showing people that things can be done the non-traditional way. I don't know, I'm obsessed with it. I really like it.
Thank you for sharing. So throughout our discussion today, you guys have all brought up networks and tapping into that. How would someone just starting out, how do they go about building their network? And then what are the critical people that you want to include in your network?
Who wants to go first?
I think Maria's the best at this.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, again, I study people and I realized that I always say, I think Andreas is here from BioDesign. I saw him on the panel list. Oh, sorry, on the attendees list. I really like to sort of like penetrate a circles of privilege. That's how I call it. I'm an outsider all the way, right? I'm not an engineer. I didn't do my PhD or anything like that. Yeah, I have some master's degrees, but still, it's not like I'm the super scientist, right? Like, you know, like you guys, you have PhDs, that's a big deal. I know that I'm a physician. I'll do. So I'm all about like, you know, asking people for advice and studying the networks that I need to get into. For example, Gabriel, he's from the Fogart Institute of Innovation, and I knew he went to the biodesign program. I don't remember how I approached you, Gabriel, or I think it was in a party or something, and you are the only other Latino, I mean, the person with a Latino name. I would just come to you and I asked Ricardo, you need to talk to this guy. He's super smart. He went to MIT and Stanford, and he's an engineer like you. You better go and talk to him. So yeah, I mean, it's all about, you know, getting to know the people, getting introductions. For example, the aesthetics community from Stanford. I didn't go to Stanford, but I got recommended by a lot of the biodesign fellows. Um, and I got in eventually. It's very difficult to get into that network. And yeah, it's applying, reapplying, trying again, ask for advice, ask for feedback. I've done a lot of programs. I overdo things, obviously. But it's been great. I mean, it helps me become a better founder and CEO, to tell a story, to get to know the people that are, you know, well connected, and just keep trying. Yeah, it's a matter of applying and replying and keep doing it.
Gabriel, what about you?
Yeah.
Any suggestions for building a network?
Definitely. So that echo all that. Definitely start by reaching out to us. Don't be shy. Or better people than us, even better. You know, but don't be shy. Reach out to who you can. I take a bit of a sniper approach with things. So if I'm talking to you at a conference, it's not by accident. I have researched that person. I know what companies they've invested in, what they're targeting, what they're looking for, who the people are. There's such a digital presence now that you can find where people go to school. You will find a video where they're interviewed and how they pronounce their name. And then they'll be surprised that you know how to pronounce their name. You know, and it's like, and I'll be like, oh, I bumped into you at the shrimp cocktails. That's not by accident. That's all on purpose. So I think do your research and don't be shy, and be aggressive, and be polite and listen. And be willing to take advice. That's the other thing. So I think people like to mentor folks that are coachable and can listen. And if you can find those places where you can connect with people to build, because we're coming from the outside, so you're building a little more of a connection so you can get to know these people a little bit. And then if they see a little bit of something in you that they have in them and they want to give you some advice, like lean into that and just like be willing to learn. And I think that pays off a lot. And then they can carry you to meet other little pockets, and slowly but surely you will crack your way into these things, but it may take some time. Yeah.
And Sandra, have you found the same to be true as you've developed your network?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it's been a lot of these like reverse interviews that I learned. Somebody told me how to, to do that when I was in maybe college or even like grad school. And I think I really started to do that when I was like trying to figure out what I was going to do after my PhD. And I was like, I'm interested in business, but there's so many ways to get into business. Like, do I go into tech licensing? Do I go into consulting? Do I go into sales? Like, what do I want to do? So I just like kind of started this like habit of reverse interviewing people that were doing cool things that I wanted to do, that I thought I wanted to do, and like trying to learn like what they were doing and like what they did right, what they did wrong, and like, do they like it? Like, do I think I'm gonna like it? So I ever since then I've just really kind of carried that habit with me, and like whenever I'm trying to accomplish something new, I kind of take this like scientist like PhD approach where like you try everything, like you talk to everyone, you learn all the facts, and then you like eliminate things, like process of elimination. And I think that through that process, like I think for me it's been like more of a curiosity of like learning new things. I just like love learning new things. But through that, like I've built my network to be like pretty large. And just, I've learned a ton, and I've met a lot of really great people. And I do think I could always be better. And I like really admire Maria and like how well she does that. Being involved with so many networks. And I try to do a better job of that. But I think that that's kind of the key, is just like building those relationships out of like a genuine, interest in like what people are doing.
And Sandra, just to add, I mean, because I get a lot of requests for mentoring, it's super important for people to like reach out, but being coachable, as Gabriel was mentioning, but more importantly, to deliver, to execute. So at least in my case, I've seen, I've shown progress, and people really like that, and they keep, helping you. That's super important. Not only like, oh yeah, mentor me, but I mean, go and do the job, come back and report to me, right?
Thank you for sharing. So if we could switch gears a little bit, we've talked a lot about like as founders, like what are the skill sets, the things you can focus on. If we can kind of shift the conversation to as investors, if we can try to convey or explain to the investors, what does it mean by them investing in these innovations and this technology from communities of color? What does it mean to you individuals as founders, but what does it mean to the community as a whole?
I can start maybe. But I'll take a little bit of an angle that I think we're a good investment. And
Yes.
I think that's what I think there's a theme here that you're hearing across everybody, which is basic struggle makes you strong, right? You run with ankle weights, it makes you stronger. Now, of course, you're running with ankle weights, so that slows you down. But if you can drop the weights, you can really go, right? So I would say to the few, I don't know how many courageous investors there are on this panel, but just turn us loose, right? I think if we can like go, we could really, really fly. I think that our industry, unfortunately, is not super diverse, but patients are. And that's like product design 101. It's like you have to have empathy and understanding of who your patients are and what they need. And, and I'm in a field of dermatology, which is generally thought of as like horribly bland and homogenous, but that's partially because of a lack of access. It's like anybody who has skin can get skin cancer. And we were really proactive about when we ran our pivotal trial, we included people with dark skin types. 20% of our subjects in our trial were skin of color patients. That's probably not going to happen at other dermatology startups because they may not care so much. But that's not only is that I think good just integrity and good science, but it's good business. I mean, there's a lot of the population, this country, 20% roughly Hispanic, 10%, 12% African American. That's 1 in 3 people that are type 4, 5, and 6 skin, right? So I think about that along all those different dimensions. So I think it's a big opportunity, but I'll put it at that.
Thank you for sharing. Sandra, would you?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it means is like, I mean, you're pretty much unlocking potential that's there. I mean, like we're as, underrepresented, we're kind of we can be overlooked by, by traditional investors. And with that being overlooked, there's opportunity, like undervalued, like underappreciated, like there's value that's been built there, like so much work. Imagine like all of the like achievements of the people on this panel and more, you know, that we've accomplished, but like people aren't like giving us the credit for that accomplishment, and like people aren't investing, and they're not gonna like benefit, they're not gonna get the upside that they could. So I mean, I just think it's a financial opportunity for investors to invest in these companies and in us. It's also just like I guess just, you know, being open, being just more aware of like, you know, what you're doing. Like just people aren't, you know, they tend to invest on, you know, based on friendships, based on you know, on pattern recognition, on like the traditional, the everyday people that they come across. And so like it's so easy to just overlook people that are just not like you. So it just, I feel like just being open to like meeting people who are very different from you in background can just open up so many opportunities for like, you know, cross-pollination ideas, like cultural and you know, bring products to market that are going to address like so much more of our country than what's been done before.
Thank you for sharing. Maria, did you want to add anything?
No, it was perfect. Unlock the talent that is everywhere, by the way. Opportunity is not. We are underutilizing, I don't know, 70% of the population in the state. Just don't get it. I don't know why. And yeah, I mean, the best founders are the ones that have struggled more. It's very hard to build a business. So if I were an investor, I'll be definitely investing in underrepresented and women. Yeah.
So I guess I would ask one more question is we've talked about like the importance of investors investing in these innovations from communities of color. Where do they find? So I'm an investor. Where do I go to find organizations like yourself or other entrepreneurs from communities of color to invest in?
I think
the color.
And we were talking about this, you know, earlier, like there's just not even like a database of other people in this field, right? In this industry that are like Hispanic. And so like we know each other, like the three of us, but you know, we don't really know that many more people that are in this field. And there must be some out there, but it's not very obvious. It's not very evident. And so I feel like it's so important to have MedTech Color kind of convene all of us and just kind of like build that, like, you know, that what is it called? The lighthouse, you know, just like, hey, we're here, you know, come join us, and then just kind of like network amongst ourselves and like kind of build the connections, and then show the value, like, you know, update the industry, like show how powerful our innovations are being in the marketplace. And I feel like just by bringing awareness to what we're doing and the impact we're having, that's gonna, you know, I think increase awareness for everyone, and also hopefully like inspire other people to join in this industry.
Definitely. Well, I think that's a great segue into our wrapping up the webinar. But I would like to, number one, thank all of our panelists for being here today. It seems like some of the key takeaways we had was really talking about like being scrappy, finding your strength, and really hard work. Investing that hard work is going to help get the results that you're looking for. So again, I would like to thank all of you all for being with us today, as well as our attendees for joining us and participating in this a very engaging discussion. I would like to ask for those who are participating to please complete the feedback survey that should be popping up in just a moment when the webinar ends, and then encourage you to go and visit MedTech Color's website to learn more about what our panelist was talking about today, seeing how you can find opportunities to invest in communities of color, and get some of the resources you need to be able to advance your entrepreneurial opportunities. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to presenting you with future learning opportunities.